time I was on this stage was with my high school band in '97. Yeah, hi guys, I'm Michael, I work at Ivan's Active, where I'm the lead writer on the new Hitman game. Is it me or the... So, I'm gonna tell you a bit about stories in Hitman without actually telling you much about the story in Hitman. Because we only just had our first release last month and I'm not really allowed to spoil much, if anything. So I'll start by running you through the history of the franchise. So let's go here. Right. So Hitman's been around for 15, 16 years, give or take. It began as a sort of intelligent stealth puzzle alternative to many of the shooters at the time. It was pretty bleak and cynical assassin fantasy, actually very akin to the Jason Bourne films, very influenced by these 90s post-Cold War themes and fascination with human cloning. We don't talk that much about cloning anymore. But then as it evolved, sort of the social stealth and puzzle elements, they became much more advanced and emerged as sort of the hallmark of the franchise. And our fans began to adapt a very distinct style of play, where it's like guns are for amateurs, and people were really putting a lot of time and effort into performing flawlessly and being silent and so forth. It also became slightly more surreal with each iteration, and more darkly comical, culminating in Blood Money, which has always sort of been the fan favorite. Then in 2012, Hitman Absolution took a completely different approach to the franchise. At the time, I guess Hitman was what you would call a big indie, and the team at the time wanted to make it much more accessible to mainstream console players. So they pretty much changed the genre and made it into this linear action shooter with, of course, still some pockets of the old stealth puzzle gameplay. And needless to say, it was pretty eclectic beast. The style was deliberately low art in a way, very much inspired by exploitation and the grindhouse films that were very popular at the time, with some elements of spaghetti westerns and film noir. And it kind of celebrated the grotesque and the exaggerated and the cartoony, if you will. So basically, it was a huge success. The team succeeded in making Hitman much more mainstream, and it attracted millions of new players. But of course, as these things go, the old fans were not too pleased. So this new Hitman game is a very different take again. It's a return to the Blood Money style social stealth puzzle gameplay. It's also very non-linear, where Absolution was extremely linear. This time around, I would say the genre is a classic spy thriller. The style is naturalistic and pretty dry, very deadpan. It's serious, but it doesn't have the exaggerated pathos of many Hollywood blockbusters and that Absolution had. The story also is pretty epic, I guess, but it's grounded in reality, and the characters are very down-to-earth, actually humane and believable. The game sells a very exclusive fantasy. It's we call it social stealth and tourism, where it's 1847. We see him as sort of the apex predator. He's the best assassin in the world, which of course means that he moves only in the highest circles of society. And he is first and foremost a strategist, not a gunslinger or an action hero or anti-hero. The game is very much about pulling off the impossible and trying to do so as discreetly and artfully as you possibly can. The analogy I usually use is that it's Ocean 11 with murder. And I guess an obvious comparison for this iteration is the current James Bond series, especially Casino Royale, the first one, and the Mission Impossible franchise. Those are both franchises that, like Hitman, frequently change genre and tone and style. So, as many of you maybe know, we are releasing it as an episodic series on a contemporary TV series model. We currently have 3 seasons planned, And season 1 contains these seven main missions and 7 unique locations that you can see here. It's released in monthly drops. It started last month, it ends in September. And then there's a bunch of additional content as well where we reuse those environments to make different missions. And of course, there are many reasons for going episodical, some gameplay, some economic and release related, but as a writer, I think the main narrative advantage of this model is simply the time frame. As I said, we have an overarching story that spans 3 seasons of releases. That's a lot of time. And really, this entire season here is really only Act 1. If it was a movie, it would be Act 1 in a very large, ambitious storyline that unfolds over a lot of time. It introduces a brand new host of characters, and it also kind of explores 47's past, or the part that's been untold so far. And of course, this time frame means that I can, that wasn't yet. I can avoid what we call the narrative wall. So I don't need to front load a ton of story, and you called it earlier a lore bomb. That was great. A lore bomb and a lot of cutscenes when all players really want to do is play the game. So the story evolves pretty slowly as a background presence, and it only builds up speed over months of releases. For instance, I think in Absolution we had 90 minutes of cutscenes in total. That's pretty much a feature film. In season 1 here we only have 18 minutes, I think, not including the mission briefings, of course, actual cinematics. And that's really just one scene per mission that is triggered after completion, so it feels like a reward and not like a chore, something you have to sit through in order to play the game. It also means I can spend much more time introducing and building up my characters. The cutscenes don't necessarily have to be plot-driven, and I can afford to dwell on a character's past or relationships between characters if I want to. And then finally, this is something we feel is actually very important, is we have time to establish what we call a state of normality, where most AAA games that are based on a cinematic model and story structure, if there's any normality at all, it's usually just the intro or maybe the tutorial, and then things get spectacular. But this time around, Hitman is not really, this iteration of Hitman is not really a story-driven game as such. It's more about the world. That's why we call it the world of assassination. That's the tagline. And we felt that it was very important to experience the everyday life of being 47. That means killing people Monday to Friday. And 47 and Diana, they've been a team for 20 years or so. They are at the top of their game, and we wanted players to get a chance to know what their world feels like before things change, before the shit hits the fan and things become extraordinary. So, I start with the main story. I guess a lot of players out there are asking, why do a main story at all? Does a game like Hitman really need one? After all, each mission is in itself this little pocket universe. It's rich, independent narrative in its own right, and couldn't we just do that, do unrelated episodes for all time? And I guess we could, but precisely because we're going episodic, we thought that we really need a main story more than ever, because if you don't create that sense of, oh my god, what happens next, I can't wait till next month's release, then at some point you will lose interest and play something else. So also I think these days a lot of gamers say that they actually dislike narrative. There's this whole wave of making games less narrative. Personally, what I think they really dislike is either a bad story or pretty much any story, either good or bad, that gets in the way of gameplay. So we decided that if we could make a good story that didn't get in the way of gameplay, then we should be on relatively safe ground. So, that's dark. So this is season 1. Each season is pretty much structured like a contemporary TV series with mid-season turns and end-season cliffhangers and so forth. What you see here is actually that the main story and the mission stories run in parallel. There's the prologue, which is a flashback. That's a main story beat because it's also actually a franchise moment. It takes place in the past, and you witness how 47 became part of the ICA and how he met his handler Diana. But then, after the prologue, they actually split apart, and we just do these. Every mission is an independent narrative, and the main story just floats in the background. There are these cutscene beats, of course, in between. And I don't know if you can see it, there's actually stable arrows there because, of course, the mission stories are related to the main story. It's all tied together, but it's very subtly connected. And you might even miss it if you don't care. That's fine. So the whole first season is all about introducing the main characters and the central conflicts and building up a mystery and a turning point. And then we build towards a season 2 that's much more story heavy. And this goes on for most of the season. And then when we get to the final 2 chapters in Colorado and Japan, the stories actually merge again. And they stay that way. So from then on throughout seasons 2 and 3, all missions are actual beats in the main storyline. So that's a way of gradually getting players accustomed to this world and without tossing a whole bunch of narrative in their faces from the beginning. So of course, the biggest dilemma when you write for Hitman is the character himself. He would never work in a film, he would never work in literature. Basically, how do you tell a mature, meaningful story with a main character who doesn't have any goals? He doesn't change, he's pretty much passive. He takes a contract, he kills his target, he doesn't do anything else, he doesn't investigate, he doesn't care about things. 47 is a clone. He doesn't feel normal empathy. Some people have gotten the impression that he's some sort of psychopath who enjoys killing people. That's actually wrong. I would say he views himself the way a machine would. He defines himself as purely as his function, which is what he was made for, and that is assassination. He accepts that this is his function, and he strives to fulfill it to the best of his ability. And so to him, purpose is really to be flawless. He knows, of course, that morality exists, but he also knows that he's blind to it. So in that way, Diana, his handler, has become an external consciousness to him. And in a way, we've talked about, we've used a lot of analogies, of course, Sherlock being one of them. But in a way, he's a lot like Dexter. He knows that he's flawed and he's following the code of someone else, in this case, Diana. But he doesn't grow as a character in any traditional sense. So this doesn't work. We tried. Early on in this project, we tried to give him like the proper hero's journey character arc, turning him in from this passive weapon into this dark avenger sort of character, champion of justice and all that. And it works fine from a purely narrative point of view, but we decided against it because, first of all, our fans hate it. And not the storyline itself, they've never heard it, but they don't like the idea that 47 changes. They like this apathetic assassin. They don't like that he has goals. They don't want him to change. Maybe even more importantly, we wanted to avoid what some have called ludonarrative dissonance, which is a concept I really think is very interesting, which happens whenever the story and the gameplay pull in opposite directions. So it's very common in these action adventures like Tomb Raider, for instance, where the main character is portrayed as a sensitive, fully functioning human being, but nevertheless they kill these hundreds of enemies without taking any psychological toll whatsoever. Think of Lara Croft, where if a lot of you played the reboot, it's great, but she has this wonderful, heartbreaking moment when she is forced to take a man's life for the first time, but boy does she run fast. And before she gets off that island, she's pretty much history's greatest mass murderer, right? I think that maybe that's why game developers like zombies so much, because you can kill them with no moral implication. So, first glance, Hitman fares a little better. We're not actually we're not throwing, these legions of enemies at the player and asking them to dispose of them. We're really just saying, kill this one guy, maybe two, and try not to kill anybody else, because that's the professional thing to do. But Hitman is a sandbox game, so players can pretty much do what they want. Also, and this is where it diverges from most games, I think, it takes place in a completely civilian world. It's not a post-apocalyptic feel. It's not a battleground. It's not anything like that. It happens around. It could be here, among us. That's an unsettling thought. But and it's also a very hard game. So even if you're doing your best to be the perfect assassin and you complete your mission and you walk on, you go, oh, okay, that was actually pretty sleek, pretty skillful. You probably killed a couple of guards and maybe a maid, maybe a handyman. It builds up. And if you try and make this beautiful story about meaningful journey, character transformation, 47 becoming a champion of good and all that, it doesn't really sit right that the next thing you do is kill a security guard. It doesn't ring true. So we thought we'd take a different approach. That was, how can we get this guy to act without building in some sort of moral dimension or character growth in a classical sense. So whatever growth or change occurs, it doesn't have a moral dimension. And first we looked at, what could an emotionless cloned assassin care about? Why would he choose to act? And when is he more than this function that he defines himself by? And the first thing we realized was that this is past. He learned about some of his past in the original game, but clearly it was never the whole story. And we thought, hey, okay, he does feel curiosity and he does want to know about his origin. And then there's Diana. And Diana's 47's only really human connection. She's the only red thread through the series, and they have been through a lot together. And he trusts her, and he trusts her judgments, and that's why whatever motives and goals she has also becomes his in a way. So if you want 47 to act, you need to either invoke his past and or ask yourself, what does that Diana actually want? So that means moving the narrative center, where 47 is clearly the avatar. He's very important to everyone and to the story, of course, but it's actually this guy, the mysterious adversary, who is introduced in the Paris cutscene, the first main mission of the season, and Diana, and a third yet unrevealed character, who are the actual main characters of the story. And most of the main story is about them. And unlike 47, they are very human, and it is their goals and their relationships that actually move the story forward. Now, moving on to mission stories, which is, 90% of the game. So, what is a Hitman mission? Well, first of all, it's a mission. It's always a mission. In Absolution, it was much more linear. You had varying kinds of objectives. In this game, it's always hit-centric. This means that every mission you undertake is centered around an assassination and a contract, even the story climaxes. And I think this is actually one of the most challenging things about writing a story for this game, is to make it plausible that every step involves killing somebody. After all, when you think about it, this is a spy thriller. You want to figure stuff out, and assassination and investigation, they don't really go hand in hand. So that's a bit of a challenge. Then, of course, it's absolutely non-linear. The missions there are beats in the main story, as I said. There's always a connection, but as soon as you go in-game, eliminating the target is the only story requirement you have. Everything else is completely voluntary. You can miss everything if you want. You can snipe your target from, walk 5 steps into the mission, snipe someone through a window and walk out again and, get a laugh, but still it's your money, right? So it needs to offer what we call social tourism, which is access to exciting events and exotic locations that we can't visit in real life, at least most of us can't. This is 1847 in its prime, and each mission gives players access to a hidden world of the global elite, whether it could be cultural or corporate or political or whatever, but it's a scene you're not able to enter in normal life. It's also, at the same time, it needs to be civilian, because that's one of the staples of the game. That's what makes it unusual, that you always have this event like the fashion show in Paris that's extraordinary, but then it's also very civilian and ordinary and mundane. And as I said, it takes place right here around us. There's almost a social realistic quality to the world of Hitman, which is where much of the black humor comes from too. And then finally, of course, replayability is really the foundation of Hitman. And the gameplay and the in-game stories, they're constructed in a way so you only get the full content after many, many different playthroughs. Of course, this also means that the storytelling is very fragile. It's highly complex, but also extremely fragile. I mean, as a writer, we've heard this from some of the other speakers as well, I have no control over what, if anything at all, a player experiences. And indeed, if someone goes in guns blazing, they will experience 0% of the narrative content. Everything just breaks apart. And it can return, of course, if you return to ambient. But even going in guns blazing, it also only presents you with 5 or 10% of what the gameplay is all about. It's also, of course, very vulnerable to critique, both from players and reviewers, because normally, if you play a mission, you go in, you repeat, you complete it once, maybe twice, then you move on, and you have this very limited narrative experience, and maybe you conclude that, hey, the narrative is thin, but you're supposed to really grind it to get all the pieces of the puzzle. And of course, you need to accept that as a writer. I was tearing my hair out a couple of years ago, but at this point, I have fully accepted it. This is how the game is, and those players who actually care about the narrative, they will go look for it. But of course, I also want to tell meaningful stories, with the means of my disposal. So this is kind of how we currently do it. So the plot of a mission doesn't really unfold in any traditional sense. It's not a start and a middle and an end. It's more a situation that's frozen in time. So like the fashion show is running. It will, that's a really bad example because it doesn't keep running. But at least, the party never ends. It's an event, it keeps going. So it's on a loop. And the storytelling exists in these little pockets that you need to discover and poke at and manipulate to your advantage. And we sometimes call it's like a little Swiss clock in a way. It's this intricate little machine on a circular loop, and then you've got to find ways to prod it however you want. And you also, pretty much everything beforehand. You're briefed about the situation by Diana. So it's not a whodunit. It's you don't enter knowing nothing and then realize what's actually going on. It's more, we tried it, but since it's a non-linear sandbox game, it's completely impossible to communicate. For instance, the Paris level, spoilers, but it's about a spy ring who have found a really clever way to get the secrets out of the global elite. And in the first iteration of the mission, you didn't know that to begin with. You were briefed on the target and the event, the fashion show, all the surface stuff, of course, but then you had to figure it out on your own, and nobody gets it. I almost didn't get it. So it's kind of, you get pretty much the information beforehand, and then instead the in-game narrative is much more subtle and more personal. It's about getting under the surface, discovering the relationships and conflicts between all these characters, the backstories and the secrets, unlocking these subplots, and discovering how everything is connected with the main story, of course. And needless to say, we have a shitload of dialogue. This is pretty much the model we have. The foundation, of course, is systemic AI. And in Hitman, it's unbelievably huge. Because this is it's not a binary system. It's not about, either people are friendly or they're trying to kill you. There's loads of these in-between states. They can be curious or alerted or suspicious or whatever. They need to be aware of other characters because of the disguise system and all that. In fact, the AI has become so big that it actually, the other elements of the game that suffer from it, because voice variety, for instance, a lot of people are saying, you cheapskates, why don't they have Moroccan accents in Marrakesh? Well, that's because, then the actor would have to re-record a 1,000-page AI script with that particular accent for it to work. So that's why it's pretty much an English-speaking game. On top of that, we have what we call location ambience. That's the atmospheric dialogue that makes the place come alive. But it's really only tied to the actual location of the place, because we also use it for different missions that could take place, a month ago or a year ago, or even in a sort of parallel universe. And then we have the mission ambience. That's pretty much the same as the location ambience, but it's tied to the actual mission of what's going on. So that would be all the characters at the fashion show talking fashion-related things. And then on top of that, we have the mission script. This is usually where I come in. This is where the mission story and the various subplots unfold, and where I can develop the characters and reveal their backstories and ties and all that. So usually I would start by taking the target's loop, then try and jam in as much story content as I can, like conversations with other NPCs and phone calls and stuff. Then I think about key dialogue, all the stories and information that I want to convey, and then I spread it out across the entire map, usually through conversations between other NPCs. And since there's really no linear path, I try to make the relevant content available in multiple places. And of course, all this stuff happens pretty much automatically, just when you're in the vicinity of the characters, and you basically just have to follow them around to find it and listen to it. But then the sort of the best stuff, it's something that you need to trigger yourself, and this is what we call opportunities. It's pretty much my single most important storytelling tool in game. It's these little islands of linear storytelling within the non-linear frame of the gameplay. So you can see there's a subplot that's built around a unique gameplay path as well. So if you follow an opportunity, you don't just get a narrative, you also get a really rewarding, spectacular way of killing the target. All the best accident kills and spectacles is also where you find the most memorable disguise fantasies. For this game, I try to build up the chameleon aspect of 47, where when he disguises himself, it's not just superficial, he also adapts the mannerisms of that character. So impersonating a key character, like in this case, is a famous psychologist, he actually does a session with the target, and those are some of the most memorable scenes in the game, I think. And each opportunity is also carefully aligned with the assassination fantasy that I've been talking about, where it doesn't, you don't, if you follow one of these paths, you will pretty much solve it in a way, the way 47 would have. And it should give you a high rank as a true silent assassin, where it's like, walking a mile in his shoes, so it doesn't get messy, it's very clean and satisfying and elegant. It's also a good way for me to judge my own work, because when you have this non-linear sandbox thing and you have no idea what players are actually experiencing, it's very hard to go, okay, this is good, I can move on, the script is done. In this case, I can sort of ask myself, okay, if you complete all of these opportunities, have you had a good experience? Does the mission feel like a fulfilling fantasy? And if I can answer yes to that, then maybe it's time to move on. So this is pretty much, again, it's very dark, but this is pretty much what a target loop would look like. They are on obviously a circular loop, and there are story moments spaced out in that loop. Then impossible to see all these little circles would be all the NPC moments where people are talking about the characters and giving depth and background to him or her. And then we have these linear tangents, which are the opportunities. That's actually something you trigger, and then you follow it through, and that's in a way very, very much more akin to traditional storytelling in films or literature or comic books or whatever. And I think that's pretty much what I have. Thank you.